thanks for having us. And I think this does align quite well with the previous couple of sessions, actually. So it should follow on quite nicely. I'll take any questions at the end. I'll quickly introduce kind of who I am and why I'm doing it, because I think that's quite important. I'm from the University of Salford. I'm technical director of a couple of labs up there. So I run the Energy House, which is a Victorian terrace within an environmental chamber. I also oversee the thermal measurement laboratory, which looks at insulation and how we apply insulation and measure the performance of insulation, again under controlled conditions and labs. I have a smart meters and smart homes lab, which looks at smart meters in smart homes, as you may imagine. And our most recent facility is Energy House 2, which is a large £16 million set of chambers where we can replicate pretty much any climate from around the globe. And we are building 4 houses in there with large house builders. So that's looking at new builds. So a lot of work around chambers, energy, and the efficiency of buildings in essence. But I am an academic, but I'm also a chartered surveyor, and I was for a long time. I've done my time in local authorities, Ministry of Defence, RAF, all types of different places. And I went into academia, got my PhD, but I have a wide range of experience in doing work, okay, rather than just sit in a smoke-filled office. So hopefully I've got enough expertise to kind of lead some of this work. So when we talk about retrofit, we always start with this set of slides, that says, look, it always goes wrong. And I can show you slides about Fishwick and Preston. I can show you all the mold growth and condensation problems and this and other. I'm not going to do that today. So if you're expecting any disasters, please leave now. Because really we need to kind of shift on with retrofit. We need to say, look, it has gone wrong in some circumstances, but let's try and get it right. And I think that's what this standard that I'm going to talk about, hopefully, will do. So any disasters, you can feel free to leave. There's just one. So this was quite a funny one that I saw. It's not particularly retrofit, but it just goes to show that when someone does something wrong, they might think they're doing it right, but it always can end up going backwards. And that's basically a classic example of someone putting an air conditioner on the wrong way round. That's probably why they've got the fan at the end of the bed as well. So just because something looks right, it isn't always right. Okay. So a couple of people have mentioned this standard as we've been here this morning, past 2035. I'm not going to go into the standard because, listen, who wants to talk about standards all day? That's my job. So past 2035 should cover all publicly funded retrofit in the UK. And that came in last year. So this isn't a new thing. We should be dealing with it now. It should be a live project, and it is. Okay, and there are assessments and there are installations going on under the auspices of past 2035. So this is live, it's not new. Within past 2035, there is a requirement for another standard to be created. And this is the standard I'm going to talk about. And I think it's quite relevant to all of us in this room. This is about how we assess a building before we retrofit it. And historically, we haven't done that. I suppose it's like akin to what John was saying. We have to assess the significance of a building before we make changes to it, and we have to assess the condition of a building before we make changes to it. Because if you don't do those things, it can all go horribly wrong, and we end up with a disaster. Okay? So, within the text of past 2035, and I know Peter Rickaby quite well, who wrote it, there is a section that says, under retrofit assessment, we shall improve the standard and we shall create a new standard. So that is the standard that this is all about. And it's quite a straightforward one, I hope. So the assessment of properties is currently going ahead. So there's around, so I spoke to Trustmark the other day. So these are live figures, I think from last Friday. Around 200,000 assessments have already been carried out under past 2035. There are some suggestions by those in the industry that the work that's gone on up to now hasn't been of a of a very high quality. Because with the exception of some of the text within PAS 2035, there isn't a standard. I guess it's the same as when we talked about the joint statement document. Because there's nothing there that everyone agrees on, everyone kind of does it different. Okay, and dare I say it, when people do it different, that's not the right way to do it. And there's often this race to the bottom when we're talking about the relatively low kind of fees that are being exchanged in this process. And commonality is what we should all be striving for. So, we need a standard. That's what we're doing. This standard was always meant to be there, and it is a separate standard. So, my symbols for what this standard is really is where building surveying, so I'm a building surveyor, so I can speak to that, meets energy. And I'm also an energy guy as well, so I kind of fit nicely in the middle. So damp meters meet EPCs. That's kind of where we're at. So this is about a process where we're examining the performance of a building in terms of energy. We might be making some comments on condition and all sorts of other things which I'll cover in a second. But in essence, that's what we are, that's what we're there to do. So, the group, the chair is myself, and there's a well-selected panel from industry, academia, and not-for-profits. There's a couple of us that are in this room, 3 of us, I think. And we cover the full kind of, hopefully the full remit of kind of what we're there to propose. We've got insulation, we've got energy efficiency people, architectural people, energy performance experts from the BRE, sustainable buildings people, people who represent the installation industry. Obviously, we've got our learned colleague Steve and John as well, and a few others who are kind of experts in this area. Okay, so it's a nice panel. It's quite friendly. There's no real contention. We're all there for the right reasons. And there are 8 key areas to this standard. I'm not going to labour the point with huge swathes of text on slides. I'm going to just explain what they are. So, context. We've talked about context. I've got questions about context. Context is really important when you're looking at buildings. If you don't know what it's next door to, if it's up a hill, down a hill, in a valley, in an area of wind-driven rain, look, I don't need to preach to the choir. We all know about this. Context is really important. If we don't know the context, we're going to struggle with significance, we're going to struggle with pathology, we're going to struggle with lots of different stuff. Where is the building? What's it surrounded by? That is a key part of the assessment. Another key part of the assessment is condition. Prior to this, when we talk about retrofit in a building, someone goes to do an EPC, someone says, put this type of insulation on it, put that in the loft, put an air source heat pump in it, and off we go. Everyone's happy. That's a terrible way of doing it. If we don't know the condition of the building, we don't know where there's areas of moisture, damp, mold growth, all the things that we're experts on in the room, we can set ourselves up for massive failings with inappropriate materials, inappropriate measures, and things that are just going to fail over time. So we have to, in the assessment, describe the conditions of all the elements of the building. Walls, roofs, floors, heating, ventilation equipment, anything that's there. So you can imagine in your kind of mind at the moment now that this is quite a detailed assessment. It's not something you're going to do in 15 minutes like an EPC. We talk about an hour and a half, that type of level survey. So we talked about this as well, occupancy. The occupancy levels, the type of occupancy, the number of people in the building, the way it's used is a key driver to retrofit. If we know that a building has got lots of people living in it, or it's over-occupied or under-occupied, then some of the retrofit measures that are suggested or are taken on may vary. It might also be that changes need to be made to the actual occupancy in the building as well. I've never been a fan of doing things like saying, stop drying your clothes on a radiator, because that doesn't make any sense. If they want to dry the clothes on a radiator, they should be able to. We can say, if you do, then open the windows, or the ventilation might be up the wall. We don't know what it is. We shouldn't be really saying that, in my professional opinion. And this leads to the next one, ventilation. When we look at the ventilation in the building, bearing in mind I'm a building surveyor and I've done it for a long time, you guys are all experts in property. Who actually checks the ventilation in the building? Hands up, anyone who's ever checked the ventilation in the building. Okay, how do you check it? So this standard goes as far as to say, if it's got an extract fan in, you get a flow measurement device with a hood, and you check it. Not just saying it's got one, not just saying it spins, makes a nice noise. We need to know that this is working properly. And we got some figures, we use token figures from the building regulations and other kind of standing figures as ideas of what good practice is. We should be looking at things like undercuts on doors, again, where it's practical and keeping fire regulations in mind. We should be looking at trickle vents and through ventilation. No good just having an extract fan. If it hasn't got trickle vents in the next room, that is a useless and token device. So we do a full assessment. So there's a standard, BISRIA BG 46, it is. That is a standard for how we do retrofit assessment of ventilation. It's about 20 pages long. You need a bit of equipment. It's a couple of £100. You have to have it calibrated every year by UCAS. It's a proper ventilation assessment. Without that, you are really, really stuck. If you don't know what the ventilation characteristics of that building is, should I say, you shouldn't be making any retrofit changes to it whatsoever. So that's a key point. Ventilation runs right the way through past 2035. Pardon me. Energy. When we're looking at the retrofit of buildings, EPCs or passive house assessments are generally taken account of. So we kind of happy with those. The main thing with this is what the retrofit assessor provides is a retrofit assessment report that then goes to someone else to design the measures for the retrofit. So we're there to take very good record of the things that can affect the energy performance of that building. So we measure the wall thicknesses. We get a good idea of what the section of the wall is made up of, so someone else can do a U-value calculation. We make best efforts to do things like measure the windows. So when you're doing an RD-SAP or an EPC, for instance, you don't measure the windows. It puts a standard figure in. Without the window sizes, we don't know how much heat loss they provide. We don't know anything. So the energy side of things is basically a measured survey plus the energy things that we usually pick up upon. So, not going to talk about significance because I think John's addressed that quite well. What I will say is that part of the retrofit assessment is a simplified assessment of significance, and it should be carried out on protected buildings. And we have this. Past 2035 gives us a difficult point to deal with in terms of traditional buildings, and it gives this 1919 figure, which no one likes. But the point is, we need to make some assessment of the significance of that building. And that is there to tell the retrofit designer and coordinator what they can, should, and hopefully, might not do if it's going to affect the building. So that's really important. And there are some nuances to it, but there's some quite good guidance to it. And I think the guidance that we're going to provide as part of this standard will be specifically aimed at the retrofit assessment and particularly tailored to this kind of simplified approach. If you don't simplify stuff and you make it too complicated, you're just going to get really bad data back. If you give people something to work with, they will generally complete the things that you need in place. So that is the key. That's the key significance, is to keep it simple but get good information out of it. Then there's reporting. What we have at the moment in terms of the retrofit market is everyone doing their own reports. Steve will do it one way, I will do it another. And we might have handwritten forms, we might have tick boxes on iPads. Everyone does it different. Now, when you're looking at doing the best part of 10 million retrofit assessments, if you're going to try and get anywhere near where we're going in terms of net zero, we should all agree that collecting condition ventilation, significance, EPC, all the other data on a building in a way that we can use as a massive data set on our housing stock. If we all agree, and I think we should, that should be standardized so we can report on it, we can research it, we can see how we're progressing on it. If we get all those reporting requirements right and everyone's doing it the same, we end up with an absolutely fantastic data set. You know, and we can easily outperform the things like the English Housing Survey and all the other reports that kind of gets done on property. We can get an idea of how we're doing. So the reporting side is really, really important. We also have to take things like photographs of the main defects, the building themselves. We take pictures for the heritage assessment side of things, lots and lots of information. Okay, so it's very useful information for people to have. Qualifications is a bit of a shaky one. That's one of the reasons that we're writing the standard itself. We believe that the standard will be the basis of a qualification. So when we look at the current training for retrofit assessors, it can range anywhere between 2 days and 5 days. It's a hell of a lot of difference between 2 and a 5-day course. And you can also have a bad 5-day course if you particularly wanted to as well. So this is about putting something on the table, again, akin to what you've done with the joint statement, to say this is what you shall learn, this is what you need to know. If you don't know these things, you can't do this job, in essence. That does exist to a certain extent. It's called the scheme operator requirements for the accreditation schemes that run these assessors. But it's quite varied. So where we're going on this is we need to have some common goals in terms of what everyone should know. It's too much of a high-risk area for someone to be trained well and for someone not to be trained well. Everyone should be up to speed on how to do this. There's also this complicating factor which says that some paths, so we have 3 paths to kind of go into a little bit of detail with retrofit assessment. Some are higher risk than others. So some may deem the requirements to be higher. So when we're dealing with heritage assets, for instance, like John mentioned, then they will need qualifications, i.e. the one that John's just referenced on his slides. Without those, we're letting people out into the wild to deal with heritage buildings that aren't qualified to do so, which it does frighten me and a lot of other people. So, to overview, we will be finished this year, hopefully. Well, it certainly be consulted on this year. The consultation will be public. Everyone will be invited to comment. And Steve, as your CEO, I'm sure will be forwarding this round to the members, asking for some feedback, which we would love. We will also be trialing this before it goes out. So I've already been speaking to the accreditation schemes about trialing it. Let's get out there in the real world, see how it works before we publish it. There's a huge opportunity here for data. For us to know about the condition, ventilation, energy performance of all our housing stock would set us apart from the rest of the world. It really would. And we have massive benefits in energy compared to the rest of the world, compared to the rest of the EU. I'm going to smart meter group, I won't bore you with the details, but everyone's envious of our smart meter infrastructure. We can do things that no one else globally can do. So it would be great for Great Britain to do this. We think the idea of putting condition and energy together is a massive pivotal moment. We all agree that it's not been done before and it shall be done in the future. And it will hopefully realise this goal of having high-performing retrofit. Everyone is tired of hearing about retrofit that fails. It's painful for us as an industry. It's painful for occupants. And we're not getting anything done. We remain stationary. Grenfell was a hideous thing to happen. And it really stopped everything in terms of insulation. And quite rightly so. But we do need to move on now with high-quality retrofits, well-planned, safe, and secure. So I'll end with a question, and it's a very quick question. I've talked quite broadly about retrofit. I mentioned it's very risky. What does everyone believe is the main risk of retrofit? Just one answer from anyone. Damp, okay? I would agree. Damp and moisture is a significant issue. I think the main risk to retrofit and the main risk around retrofit and is not doing it. If we just stop and we admit defeat and we say it's just too risky to do, then we will never, ever get where we need to be. So if we consider these simple statistics, that in the UK, about a third of energy in the UK is taken by homes. About 20% of carbon dioxide comes from homes. To get to 2050 net zero, we'll have to improve almost all of the UK's 29 million homes. And UK GBC says that if we take those figures into account, that's 1.8 homes per minute. So we've done a fair few while I've been banging on, if we're going to get to net zero by 2050. But the main risks are to people and to our economy. So if we keep not doing retrofit, if we keep on at this rate, but remain the status quo, then fuel poverty stays at about 13%. 3.1 million homes, should I say, in fuel poverty. That is a terrible statistic, and that's going to get worse. I think we can all spot that's going to get worse. People continue to die from cold conditions in poor housing. So 8,500 people died in England and Wales due to cold homes. So that's excessive winter deaths allocated to cold homes. Not just excessive winter deaths because of climate, that's due to cold homes. That's a subsection of that figure from the ONS. And it's costing us a small fortune as well. You know, it's coming up to a kind of £1 billion to deal with health issues from cold homes, inefficient homes. So if we don't do something about it, then we're kind of going to really struggle to make any movement on this whatsoever. And it will become even more of a national crisis than what it is now. So we are aiming to fix a certain element of it. You will find out what our assessment kind of schedule is, hopefully later on this year. We would welcome your feedback and we would welcome your input as well. That's all I've got to say. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, lady here.
Yeah, Richard, it's just talking about, it's great that we're talking about colder homes and the energy uses that could be used. But actually, thank you, that's a bit weird. Hello, everyone. It's great we're talking about colder homes. We know most energy is used during the winter periods, but actually we're going into a climate where we're going to see increased temperatures, we're going to see overheating. The last climate change report that was given out actually showed that overheating causes more deaths than cold conditions. And I know one of the concerns that we have about retrofit is that actually, especially internal insulation, is that we're going to end up causing overheating in our homes. So I think it's just, bear in mind everyone, it's just something to think about.
No, absolutely. Listen, I've written papers about buildings overheating as we go further down into climate change. And it will. We just need to consider it, and it needs to be part of our design. So I'm talking about assessment. The designers should be considering things like Part O, obviously that's a new build, but they should be thinking about overheating buildings. Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree.
We'll take one more, if we can.
I've got the mic.
Yes.
Can I jump in?
We can do two quick ones.
Whoever's first.
Sorry, Nigel Donahue, Insulation Insurance Authority. I think whole house retrofit is admirable, but actually I think we're missing a real problem here, and that is you talk about people in fuel poverty. What we do is we automatically jump on a new standard, and we get a lot of academics in a room when we write a new standard. We ignore the practitioners.
So I just come straight back to that.
Let me finish, please. Yeah, we've got an industry now, an installation sector that consists of around about 9,000 people. 2012, that consisted of 54,000 people.
Yeah.
The average cost of compliance now with PAS 2030 and 2035 is 38 pence in the pound. That's people like me are being fed for providing certification, protection, guarantees, everything that goes with that. Under the Green Home Voucher Scheme, that average cost of compliance was 68 pence in a pound. We're facing an energy crisis. We're facing a situation where retrofit at scale is not happening. We're doing less measures now. We're doing a seventh of what we typically used to do under eco schemes. And actually, by getting the standards right, by continuing to review and write standards which I fully support, but not policing them standards and not having correct oversight and surveillance, we're destroying any opportunity we're going to do a retrofit at scale. And actually, the adverse consequence is going to be you won't have PAS 20 and PAS 2035. You've already got Trustmark launching Licence Plus. It doesn't even consider pre-assessment as part of that criteria of property suitability. And there's more to property suitability than will it receive a measure. We know from experience, you know, intrusive surveys are very, very important. But we need to get back to reality. And reality is you've got to sit down with practitioners and people have got to go out and do the job, and you've got to understand actually how you can physically implement retrofit at scale. Because them costs, with the rise in material costs, we will not be doing retrofit. It's shocking the situation we're in now as an industry, and I support 100 or 200 installer members that are literally hand to mouth. They can't compete with this. They can't compete with the standard. They can't compete with the pricing on it. And it's, getting the standards right is important, but we wouldn't need PAS 2035 if actually people who are meant to be doing the job were doing the job properly. The oversight was proper. The crooks were taken out of the industry. And it's about enforcement. It's not about keep raising the bar. And John, I totally get your point about heritage impact. But you know what? If we exclude whole streets because we can't provide a retrofit solution, the people in them properties are the people who are suffering, the people who have got rising energy bills and can't afford. And that figure gets worse. That 8,500 is only going to go in the wrong direction.
So, Nigel, do you want a gig next time?
So can I just come back to that?
Yes, of course you can.
So first of all, I'm an academic. I lead the group. There's one or two other academics in. The rest is represented by industry, by heritage bodies, by insulation bodies as well. So I would just come back on that.
Represented by an external warm guarantee provider.
Yeah.
Represented by practitioners. They're not people on that group that have technical experience that are out on the ground trying to make it stick.
Okay. Would you want to chat about joining it?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'll come and see me at the break. Okay.
My question was, does it address, or do you have an opinion on the extent of retrofit that should be appropriate for buildings? Because obviously we have building regulations in Part L1B and they mention certain targets for U values. But where does, in your opinion, does the boundary lie between traditional buildings and meeting these requirements?
So part of the retrofit assessment process is to provide the designers with this set of baseline values for the building itself. And really it comes down to those guys to say, what do you think is a practical measure for that building? As this gentleman's just said, we can't do everything to all the buildings. We have to have some middle ground, and some buildings won't take it. Some people will take it. But ultimately it comes down to the coordinators and designers to make that call, basically.
Thank you.
Can I say thank you, Rich?